Hello everyone and welcome to another Destiny 2 video. In this video, I'm going to be going over every single world drop and ritual playlist weapon that you can get in Heresy, outlining what roles you can get and which ones I'll be looking for. As a note, this one's pretty unscripted. I'm still working on my exotic weapons video. If you haven't seen my exotic armor video, you should definitely go check that out. I'm still working on the part 2 of that video, where I'm going to be taking all of the exotic weapons from Destiny 1 and putting them into Destiny 2. But while I'm working on that video, I figured I'd make a quick unscripted video on some of the world drop and ritual weapons that you could look out for in Heresy. And as a quick disclaimer guys, these are just my opinions on what weapons and perks go well together. Destiny is such a cool game in the sense that every single weapon is unique, has unique roles, and what you like may differ from what other people like. So again, this is just a list of the weapons that I'm looking for this season, but hopefully it gives you a good idea and understanding of these weapons, what perks to look out for, and which ones to keep. And as another disclaimer, I am not really a PvP player. I primarily play this game for PvE and I dabble in PvP on the side. Other YouTubers are going to have better videos about the PvP viability of these weapons. I'm strictly going to be going over their PvE options and valuing them off of that. But kicking us off, I wanted to touch base on the resounding fusion rifle, which is the pinnacle weapon for Heresy. I'm actually going to be making a pinnacle weapon video very soon, so I'm actually going to leave this one off of the table, but just keep your eye out for that pinnacle video as I make it. So truly kicking us off, let's talk about the Boondoggle Mk, which is an incredible name, and it is an incredible looking SMG that they've made this season. I should mention that Boondoggle is a 720 RPM SMG, and it'll share similar family traits as Rapacious Appetite and Immortal and Borrowed Time from Gambit. While Boondoggle is such a cool and unique looking legendary weapon that I think you guys should get for the look alone, looking at its perks, I'm not the most jazzed about it. In the first column, you've got things like Hipfire Grip, To the Pain, Subsistence, Closing Time, Encore, and Pugilist. While in the next column, you've got things like Offhand Strike, and Harmony, Tap the Trigger, Adagio, Killing Wind, and Swashbuckler. So my recommendation for Boondoggle and what I think you guys should be looking out for is actually going to be one of two different roles. But primarily for PvE, I think Swashbuckler is going to be your top pick in the fourth column. The reason I'm picking Swashbuckler over other damage perks in this column is because A, I'm not a big fan of Adagio lowering the rate of fire. It just tends to give off lower DPS overall, and that's not something I'm looking for in PvE. With Harmony, I'm not super jazzed about it because as a primary weapon, I'm going to have Boondoggle in my hand ideally like 80% of the time of any PvE activity I'm doing. Harmony is a great perk for a swap to weapon, something like a shotgun or a fusion rifle, something that you can swap to and get quick damage out. On primary weapons, I'm not as jazzed about it. So that does kind of leave us with Swashbuckler as the kind of primary damage dealing perk. That being said, I think there are two perks that pair really nicely with Swashbuckler, and these are the two roles that I would recommend chasing. My recommendations for the pairing with Swashbuckler is going to be Pugilist and Subsistence. And this perk choice really depends on what kind of build and playstyle you're rocking with. I think as far as a weapon-focused weapon, Subsistence and Swashbuckler is going to be your go-to, as Subsistence is going to fill 17% of the mag on kill, and Swashbuckler is just going to keep escalating your damage as you get more kills. Ideally, you are firing from the hip with this weapon, taking advantage of the text balance stock, which also grants you increased reload speed. Pairing all of that together with the Swashbuckler, Subsistence, and text balance stock, I think that is a great perk combination. The other valuable perk combination I would say is going to be Pugilist and Swashbuckler. Pugilist is great for a lot of melee builds, just regenning melee energy on each kill. And once again, you're taking advantage of text balance stock, increased reload speed, and that'll help out on the back end as you run out of ammo on the mag. So yeah, in summary, I think you guys should be looking for Subsistence and Pugilist in the first column, and then Swashbuckler in the second. Again, I'm sure there's plenty of PvP options you could take advantage of here, but I think Subsistence and Pugilist in the third column paired with Swashbuckler in the fourth is going to be your go-to for PvE. Moving on to the Cruoris Fr4. I'm sure I pronounced that perfectly. Moving on to the Fr4, I'm just going to call it the Fr4. This is an aggressive frame archetype of fusion rifle. Besides Coriolis Force, it is the only fusion rifle that fires in a horizontal volley rather than a vertical volley. These kinds of fusion rifles recently got a buff in Heresy, and I'm really excited to try them out because I think with the right perk combinations, they could be kind of a pseudo waveframe ad clearing special weapon. Fr4 is an arc aggressive frame fusion rifle, which is especially important this season with arc being as big as it is. So with that in mind of it being an arc fusion rifle with great ad clear potential, let's come down and look at the perks for this weapon. Alright, so for this weapon, there's actually a couple of different things that I'm looking at here that are really interesting combinations. So let's talk about them one at a time, going from the third column to the fourth column. The first thing I want to bring up is the Recycled Energy perk, which is a new perk they've just added in episode Heresy, and basically it just gives you energy after defeating a target and reloading. I'd have to see people do some tests on how much energy this returns. That being said, I'm not super jazzed about this perk on a fusion rifle. I do think there are better options in this column than Recycled Energy though, as I'd rather see Recycled Energy on a primary weapon, something I'm reloading a lot. Or if I was to use Recycled Energy on a fusion rifle, I would love to pair it with something like Reservoir Burst, where you're constantly wanting to keep that magazine topped off. So I don't know if Recycled Energy is the play here. That being said, the two, maybe three others that I'm looking at in that third column are going to be Eddy Current, Discord, and Stats for All. Eddy Current is an honorable mention. I'm not a huge fan of Eddy Current. I am a much bigger fan of things that auto-load my magazine and reload perks where I use the weapon and gain the reload perk rather than rely on an ability to reload my weapon. But I know a lot of people like Eddy Current, so Eddy Current I think could be a great honorable mention. I definitely don't think it's a bad perk by any stretch of the imagination. It pairs beautifully with this arc fusion rifle. It's just not my particular cup of tea. The things I am really looking for in that third column though are between Discord and Stats for All, and here's why. Discord has become one of my new favorite things to put on special weapons because they are so fun to use. Discord takes your special ammo economy, basically makes it infinite provided you can get the kills with it. It is such a cool perk, and I love it even more on this fusion rifle because I think, again, this fusion rifle and this archetype is geared towards clearing out rooms of trash mobs. And for that, Discord I think is the top spot for this weapon. Stats for All is also great. Again, you're clearing out mass hordes of enemies. You are going to be hitting 3 of them with your bursts. It's probably a great perk for this fusion rifle, granting the increased reload after you get those 3 hits. So to pair with Discord or Stats for All, let's look at those fourth column perks real quick. As one I'm sort of interested in, but purely from a how does this work scenario, this fusion rifle comes with Barrel Constrictor, which states that kills with the weapon reduce pellet spread by 20% for 7.5 seconds. It's definitely an interesting perk, and I mention it more for that fact of I don't think we've seen it on a fusion rifle yet. That being said, I definitely think it's a PvP perk rather than a PvE one, but I'm super curious to see how this one shakes out, and I'd love to see some tests run on this perk. That being said, there are 3 perks in that fourth column that I would pair with either Discord or Stats for All for my best PvE role. Those being Rolling Storm, One for All, and Successful Warm-Up. Taking it from the top, let's talk about Rolling Storm, where final blows grant Bolt Charge. Bolt Charge is a arc subclass verb, and I think it's shaping up to be a very effective and powerful verb, especially when paired with some of the artifact mods. And Rolling Storm is basically just going to help you play into that arc build even more. I could definitely see Rolling Storm being paired with Eddy Current, and you just fully lean into that arc subclass and just spit lightning everywhere. So it's definitely not off the table, but I don't think it's my favorite, but I definitely wouldn't dismantle one when I get it. The next perk option I want to talk about is One for All, where hitting 3 separate targets increases damage for a moderate duration. This would be great for this type of fusion rifle, as ideally you're going to be firing it into crowds of enemies and just wiping them all. And pairing this with Stats for All, the One for All Stats for All synergy is just tale as old as time, and it is so potent and so powerful. One for All is still one of the best damage perks you can get on a weapon, as it increases damage by 35%. I think One for All Stats for All is a crazy combination, and it's definitely the one I would pair with Stats for All. The last perk I want to touch base on is Successful Warm-Up. And the reason I want to talk about Successful Warm-Up is because I think it might be a sleeper perk on this weapon. Especially when paired with Discord, I could see Successful Warm-Up just being an absolute room clearer. Because what you're going to do is you're going to get a single kill with another weapon, swap to this weapon, proc Discord, fire off a volley, and successful warm-up instantly procs. Discord refills your ammo. You can, for the duration of Discord and even beyond it, successful warm-up is going to keep rolling. I genuinely think that Discord successful warm-up is going to be an absolute room clearer. The only thing I would take over successful warm-up on this weapon would be some kind of reservoir burst or chain reaction. My PvE top picks for the FR4 are Discord and successful warm-up, stats for all and one for all, or Eddy Current and Rolling Storm. I think any of these perk combinations on this fusion rifle are going to be really beneficial for it and helping you clear out rooms of ads. Moving on, we're going to talk about the Admetus-D, which is a new Void Scout rifle. This is part of the high impact frame or the 150 RPM of firing. So these are heavy hitters, slow firing, great for PvP. I'm not a huge fan of scouts for PvE. That being said, they did just get a buff, so I'd be very curious to try them out in stuff like GMs and stuff like that. Taking a look at the perks, this is a very Void synergy heavy scout rifle, and it has some very unique perk combinations that I want to take a look at. Starting with the third column, the perks that I would recommend are Recycled Energy, Rapid Hit, and Keep Away. And some of you might be thinking, Briggs, you missed Repulsor Brace. Hear me out on why I don't want Repulsor Brace on this scout rifle. Ideally, while I'm using a scout rifle, I'm not relying on overshields to keep me alive. I'm staying at the back of the room, I'm plinking away with a scout rifle from a safe distance. Repulsor Brace should not be as vital of a perk for that. I would much rather have something else helping me out than an overshield on a Void debuff target. Unlike the fusion rifle, I actually think Recycled Energy could be really decent here. It's an infinite ammo primary, you're reloading a lot, and after every single kill and reload, you're gaining a little bit of energy back. I think unlike the fusion rifle, this could be a very viable perk for this scout rifle. Rapid Hit is kind of a no-brainer for this fusion rifle. Ideally, you're hitting your precision hits with scout rifles, and you're hitting a lot of them, and this just flat buffs the gun and makes it feel more stable and increases the reload speed. I'm a big fan of Rapid Hit on things like scout rifles and pulse rifles. Keep Away is super self-explanatory. It should be a no-brainer perk on a scout rifle. Basically, as long as you are 15 meters away from an enemy, you gain all of the bonuses, including reload, range, and accuracy. And for a scout rifle, where you're plinking people from the back of the map, you should always be more than 15 meters away from your targets. So I think Keep Away is my top choice for perks in this column, but I'll get to perk combinations in just a second. While I only had 3 perks in that third column that I would really go for, in the fourth column, I count about 4. And of these fourth column perks, the ones that I am leaning towards are going to be Withering Gaze, Demoralize, Precision Instrument, and Frenzy. So going down top to bottom, here's my train of thought. Withering Gaze is a new perk that they added last season, and honestly, I don't think it's all that bad of a perk. Being able to on-demand weaken something, especially in a GM setting like a champion, is really, really strong. Especially now that we don't have artifact perks that weaken enemies. I think Withering Gaze is going to see an uptick in usage in high-end PvE. The other perk that I am looking at for Void Synergy is Demoralize. This is a new one they've added this season, and I'm really excited to get a roll of this so I can try it out. But basically, it almost acts like a pseudo Dragonfly, where precision final blows cause nearby targets to become weakened. On a scout rifle, where ideally you're hitting and killing things with precision damage, I think Demoralize is a really strong perk here. Next on the list, we have Precision Instrument, where dealing sustained damage increases this weapon's precision damage. Again, as a scout rifle, you're trying to hit your precision hits, you're trying to lay into targets with that precision damage, and Precision Instrument scales really well with scout rifles. Precision Instrument is really punishing because if you miss a shot, all of your stacks go away. That being said, it's really easy to uptick this buff, and when the buff is fully upticked, it really hits hard at 25% damage buff. The last perk I wanted to touch base on is Frenzy. Personally, I love Frenzy because it is a perk that I do not have to think about. In a lot of my gameplay, I'm thinking about my abilities, I'm thinking about my damage rotations, and Frenzy just helps me keep a consistent damage buff without really thinking about it. Sure, it's not an amazing damage buff, it's actually one of the lower ones on this list. That being said, for the 100 handling and 100 reload speed, I still rate Frenzy as a really good perk. That being said, let's get into my combinations for this scout rifle. Starting from the third column, I think if you're going to take a perk, it either should be Keep Away or Recycled Energy. For recycled energy, I would actually say its top perk pairing is going to be Frenzy. Reason being is you want to get kills and you want to reload a lot to gain that energy back, and Frenzy helps with that reload speed and damage buff, while recycled energy provides that ability energy back to you on reload. But for Precision Instrument or Demoralize or Withering Gaze, I think Keep Away is your main perk. It's so simple to just sit in the back of the map, proc Keep Away with the increased reload, and then take advantage of either Withering Gaze or Demoralize or Precision Instrument, whichever one tickles your fancy. I personally wouldn't delete any of them. I think those are all really strong rolls for this scout rifle. So again, to summarize, I think Recycled Energy paired with Frenzy is going to be a great combination that I'll be looking for. And then Keep Away with either Withering Gaze, Demoralize, or Precision Instrument is going to do just fine for this scout rifle. Moving on, we have the Qua Furor V. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I might just call it the Qua. No, I'm not going to call it the Qua. That's stupid. For shorthand, I'll just call it the 5. The 5 is a stasis aggressive frame machine gun, which means it fires at 600 RPM. This is a new archetype they introduced in the final shape. I still prefer 450 RPMs, but 600s are really fun to shoot as well. These are heavy hitting, ad clearing machine guns, and the stasis flavor definitely helps this one stand out. Taking a look at the perks though, I think this is where my good things to say about this weapon ends. Something you should know about me is I am a massive fan of weapons that auto-load themselves in my inventory. Especially heavy and special weapons that I don't pull out too often. I primarily lean on my primary and then swap to either my special or heavy weapon depending on which enemy I'm facing. And when I swap to them, I would really like to have that weapon fully loaded and ready to go. And as you can see by these weapon perks, I do not have a single auto-loading perk in this entire perk pool. I'll still go over it, but I'll be clear, I'm not excited and not looking for any roll of this machine gun. I have way better machine guns with either auto-loading or reconstruction that I would much rather use than this machine gun. That being said though, gun to my head, let's take a look at what perks we would put on this thing. In the third column, I think there are only 2 viable perks for this machine gun that you should be looking for. These are Rhyme Stealer and Feeding Frenzy. Maybe Triple Tap as an honorable mention, but I'll get to that in a second. Starting with Rhyme Stealer, I think Rhyme Stealer is great really on any stasis weapon. It's definitely one to look out for as they recently just buffed Frost Armor to cap out at a stack of 50% damage resist, which is an absolutely huge amount of DR to have in PvE. So Rhyme Stealer is going to pair well with any stasis build, and I highly recommend keeping it on stasis weapons. Again, maybe not this one as I'm not a big fan of machine guns without auto-loading, but it's still a great perk to have. The other perk in this column that I want you guys to keep your eyes out for is Feeding Frenzy. Feeding Frenzy is kind of a no-brainer perk on machine guns. You're mowing through plenty of enemies and you're doing it fast enough that Feeding Frenzy should be up all of the time, helping you to reload that slow machine gun reload. Gun to my head, if I did have to take this machine gun, I would take Feeding Frenzy as its top perk option in that third column, maybe with Triple Tap as a backup. I know that 600s deal respectable single target damage, and Triple Tap can help you land those shots, but I find that the recoil on the 600s are really hard to manage, and so I don't know how often I would be proccing Triple Tap. That being said, it could absolutely be a skill issue. I'm not a very good shot, so it definitely could be a skill issue on my part. Moving on to that fourth column, I would say every single one of these perks are great for a machine gun except for Tap the Trigger. Tap the Trigger is more of a PvP perk, and this is a PvE list, so I don't rate it here. That being said, Elemental Honing, Dragonfly, Golden Tricorn, Rampage, and One For All are all fantastic perks for a LMG. I need to do research on how much Elemental Honing's damage ramps up to, but I think pairing Elemental Honing with something like Triple Tap would be a huge benefit as a single target damage machine gun. Again, my problem though is that I really don't know of many machine guns that are meant for single target damage. These are meant to be room clearers, these are meant to be high health ad clearers, and so I think personally, again, I would steer away from Triple Tap and Elemental Honing. I would maybe do something like Dragonfly for that precision explosion. I would consider Golden Tricorn for that 15% damage buff on just a single kill. Rampage is always great on a machine gun as you're gonna be killing a lot of things. Although I would argue that One For All is the even better Rampage because you don't even need a kill and it's a higher damage buff than Rampage. Again though, and I can't emphasize this enough, I'm really not a fan of machine guns without auto-loading or reconstruction or something like that. So if you had to ask me which perks I would lean towards for this weapon, I would say Feeding Frenzy with either Dragonfly, Golden Tricorn, or One For All. Or I would say Rhyme Stealer with Dragonfly, Golden Tricorn, or One for All. I think between those two perk combinations, you're going to have a really solid machine gun. That being said, again, I think there are better machine gun options out there, and I am very whelmed with the perk options on this one. That does it for our world drop weapons. Let's move on to our ritual playlist weapons. These weapons famously have a lot of perk options. I can barely fit them all onto my screen, so there's a lot of different roles. That being said, every time you prestige your rank in any of the ritual playlist activities, you gain a chance at double or even tripling the amount of perks that drop on these things, so I definitely wouldn't sleep on them. Kicking us off, let's talk about the Cynosure, which is a strand rocket launcher in the adaptive frame archetype. If you like Apex Predator, you are really going to like this rocket launcher. That being said, it's a ritual weapon, there's a ton of perks on this thing, so let's start to break those perks down. Taking a look at the perks, there's a couple that jump out to me on this long list. Again, I love my special and heavy weapons to be auto-loaded in some way, shape, or form, so the perks that stand out to me in that third column are going to be perks like Reconstruction and Envious Arsenal and Overflow. I don't think you could go wrong with any of those three perks in that first column. If I had to pick just one, I would say that Reconstruction is my favorite of the bunch. Again, I'm a big fan of perks that I really don't have to think too much about, and Reconstruction just automatically loads double my magazine over time, and it's a great perk to have on rocket launchers. Paired with Reconstruction, there's really only one perk that I could recommend in that third column, and that's Explosive Light. In Destiny, you are constantly running around, picking up orbs of power, and so on and so forth, so Explosive Light on a Reconstruction rocket should pair perfectly with most of your builds. As an honorable mention, maybe Lasting Impression, but I think Explosive Light beats out Lasting Impression 9 out of 10 times. Some of you are going to look at these perks and ask about Bipod or Chain Reaction, and to me, rocket launchers are very much just single target damage weapons. I personally don't use them for ad clear very much. I do have a couple of bipod rolls that I'll use on occasion for different builds and concepts, but really, if I'm using a rocket seriously, I am not using bipod, I am using something like Explosive Light. So that being said, I think your perk options are going to be Reconstruction, Envious Arsenal, or Overflow with Explosive Light. I think that has got to be your top choice. If you want an honorable mention, either Reconstruction or Overflow with Bipod is a really fun perk option to use, but I definitely wouldn't use it over my Reconstruction Explosive Light combination. Moving on to one I am really excited for this season is Joxer's Longsword. It's either Joxer or it's Joxer. I'm going to say Joxer because I know a guy named Jens, spelled Jens, so I think Joxer is probably the correct pronunciation, but I could be wrong. Joxer is a Void Heavy Burst Pulse Rifle, which is a really strong archetype right now. The only downside to this one is you get it from playing PvP, which means I've got my work cut out for me this season. Taking a look at its perks, we have a ton of viable options for PvE here. In that third column, we have things like Demolitionist, Dragonfly, Pugilist, Enlightened Action, Rewind Rounds, Repulsor Brace, Strategist, and Shoot to Loot. There are a lot of good PvE options here that I'm really having trouble narrowing this down. In the fourth column, you have things like Adrenaline Junkie, Desperado, Desperate Measures, Destabilizing Rounds, Withering Gaze. You have things like One for All, Swashbuckler, and Demoralize. There are a lot of different perk combinations here that would work really, really well together. If you wanted to know my favorite options for this pulse rifle, I would take you down two different schools of thought. The first school of thought is I want everything to blow up, I want subclass synergy, and I want it to be for low PvE activities. In that instance, I would take something like Dragonfly in the first column, paired with something like Destabilizing Rounds or Demoralize in the second. I think that pairing would be super fun in low-end PvE. You're going to be blowing everything up, your subclass synergy is going to be really good, and I think that's a very fun and satisfying perk combination to use with this 2-burst. The second school of thought is going to be high damage, high-end PvE. I want this thing to hit like a truck from miles away. In that instance, I would go for something like Rewind Rounds paired with One for All. With that combination, you're getting one of the best damage boosts in the game from One for All, paired with the ammo economy of Rewind Rounds. And especially for high-end PvE, Heavy Burst Pulse Rifles are really, really strong right now. But again, there are so many different perk combinations on this list that could be viable in PvE that I genuinely had a really hard time picking out my favorites. But gun to my head, if I had to pick 2 roles to keep for this weapon, I would keep something with Dragonfly and Destabilizing rounds, and Rewind rounds and One for All. Moving on to our Gambit ritual weapon, we have Backfang, which is an Arc Glaive in the Rapid Fire Glaive archetype. Glaives did just get a massive rework this season, and I'm very curious to try them out. That being said, I know plenty of people who are just so turned off from glaives that they will never pick one up ever. I personally don't mind them, and I'm very excited to try out the changes that they've made this season. That being said, if I am going to be using a glaive, I'm going to be using one of the exotic ones, or one that I have crafted. But let's take a look at some of the perks that Backfang has to offer. In my mind, for legendary glaives, there's really only one viable perk option. Before I get into this, I should mention again that even though I've dabbled with glaives, there are some people who are really effective with glaives, and I'm sure they have much different opinions on this weapon. That being said, the way that I use glaives revolves around a single perk that some glaives have. That perk is Close to Melee, which is something that Backfang does have. In my mind, Close to Melee is something that I need to have on a glaive. Again, I'm sure there are tons of different combinations for this glaive that I am kind of glossing over, but I'm really not an expert in glaives, and I kind of have a one-track mind when it comes to glaives. So the perk combination that I am looking for is going to be Grave Robber paired with Close to Melee. For me personally, I don't think you get much better perk synergy on a glaive. I think Close to Melee is just so mandatory for me that I need it on most, if not all of my glaives. Again, I'm not a glaive user, so maybe go watch someone who is, but I think the perk combination that stands out the most is easily Grave Robber Close to Melee. Moving on to our Crucible competitive weapon, we have Redrix Estoc. The Estoc is a Stasis Legacy PR55 frame pulse rifle, which is one of 2. The only other PR55 frame in the game is the BXR Battler that you can get from Dares of Eternity. So that alone makes this a very worthwhile and special weapon to hunt down. It kind of shares a lot of similarities in rounds per minute to a lightweight frame, but the hipfire accuracy really mimics a Halo battle rifle, which makes it really popular in PvP. Taking a look at the perks, there are a couple here that I would consider for PvE players though. In that third column, I am looking for either Rhyme Stealer or Demolitionist out of the bunch. I mentioned Rhyme Stealer previously, but I think it's such a good perk on stasis weapons, and Frost Armor getting its buff recently means that it's even better now. And then Demo is always a fan favorite of mine for any primary weapon. I'm getting so many kills with primary weapons already that it plays into a lot of the grenade builds that I have, and so Demo is always a good role to have on this pulse rifle. And then with Rhyme Stealer or Demolitionist, there are actually only 2 perks that I would consider pairing with those perks in that third column. In that fourth column, I would either chase Sword Logic or Headstone. Headstone is kind of a no-brainer perk for me for any stasis primary weapon. I think it just synergizes too good with so many different stasis builds that Headstone is honestly just a top tier perk. The only other perk I would consider instead of Headstone is Sword Logic, and that's purely because you can stack the damage of Sword Logic really high really quickly in PvE. I think for the Estoc, you really can't go wrong with either Rhyme Stealer and Demolitionist in that third column, paired with either Headstone or Sword Logic in that fourth column. That being said, if you already have some stasis rifles that you're happy with, I wouldn't bend over backwards trying to get this rifle, but it should be pretty strong either way. Last but not least, I wanted to talk about our Nightfall weapons this season, starting with the Palindrome. The Palindrome is a really popular PvP hand cannon that's returning to us as an arc hand cannon instead of a void. It's still a 140 archetype, which is a very popular and very crowded archetype to be in. Looking at the perks though, there are some really interesting options for a hand cannon, which I definitely think differentiate this Palindrome from any of the other Palindromes. Starting with the third column, the 3 perks that I would consider are Recycled Energy, Outlaw, and Explosive Payload. I genuinely think you can't go wrong with any of these 3. If I had to pick a least favorite of the 3, I would probably say it would be Recycled Energy, purely because I don't know how much energy it brings back, and I also like either a lot of damage with Explosive Payload and the increased reload of Outlaw instead of the energy regen. With that being said, let's move on to our fourth column where things get really interesting. If I had to recommend 3 perks for this weapon in PvE on that fourth column, I would recommend Magnificent Howl, Rolling Storm, or Master of Arms. Magnificent Howl is a really rare perk that has only appeared on 2 other hand cannons thus far. That being said, out of the 3 perks that I recommended in that fourth column, it's really not my personal cup of tea. I definitely think there are better options than Magnificent Howl. Again, I really like perks that I really don't have to think about too much. Unfortunately, Magnificent Howl is one of those perks where you really have to be conscious of how many stacks you have before you reload. So as good as Magnificent Howl is, I think it's actually the 3rd place perk I would name for this one. Still great. If I got it, I'd be happy, but it's not my top pick. I think Rolling Storm is going to be a top tier perk for this hand cannon. Bolt Charge is really strong this season, and it pairs great with a majority of arc builds out there. So I think Rolling Storm is definitely going to be a top tier pick. Master of Arms I think is also going to be an extremely popular pick on Palindrome. It's basically a 2-tier stacking rampage buff that you can get with any weapon kill, not just Palindrome. And the 25% increased damage it provides really isn't all that bad. So the perks I'd look out for on the Palindrome are very interchangeable, but in that third column I would definitely recommend either Outlaw or Explosive Payload, and in that fourth column I would recommend either Rolling Storm or Master of Arms. I think any combination of those 4 perks are going to do you just fine in any PvE activity you run into. The last weapon I want to go over in today's list is the Lotus-Eater, which is a Void Energy rocket-assisted frame sidearm. The rocket-assisted frame sidearms recently caught a nerf from Bungie, but I still don't think that'll keep them from being one of the most popular archetypes in the game. That being said, let's go ahead and take a look at these perks for PvE. The 3 perks I would be on the lookout in that third column for Lotus-Eater are definitely going to be either Strategist, Feeding Frenzy, or Repulsor Brace. Now I know some of you are going to be looking at reconstruction for this weapon, and normally I would too. As I've stated before, I love weapons that auto-load themselves in my special and heavy slot. That being said though, for rocket-assisted frame sidearms, you're actually using them more like primaries, so reconstruction is not as valuable of a perk for me. Instead of reconstruction, I would definitely be looking for something like Feeding Frenzy or Repulsor Brace. In that fourth column, you've got things like One for All, Destabilizing Rounds, and Withering Gaze. The 2 different directions I'm leaning towards taking this rocket frame sidearm would be either a pure ad clearing route or a pure void synergy route. For an ad clearing gun, I would definitely lean into something like Feeding Frenzy and One for All or Destabilizing Rounds. Destabilizing Rounds got a huge buff going into Heresy, and I've heard it is performing really well now. So I definitely wouldn't sleep on it for this weapon. And of course, Destabilizing Rounds pairs perfectly with something like Repulsor Brace. But I don't think you could go wrong with Feeding Frenzy and Destabilizing Rounds either. Leading into that Void Synergy, again, you could go Repulsor Brace and either Destabilizing Rounds or Withering Gaze. Both of those perk pairings are going to do you just fine. Gun to my head, if I had to take a single roll of this weapon though, I would definitely lean into Feeding Frenzy and Destabilizing Rounds. I think Feeding Frenzy is an absolutely fantastic perk to have on weapons that you're getting a lot of kills with, which the rocket-assisted frame sidearms definitely do excel at. And then Destabilizing Rounds helps that ammo economy by spreading that volatile to other enemies and making them easier to kill. But again, for all of those weapons, those are just my opinions on what roles I am looking out for this season. Let me know your thoughts and let me know what weapons and roles you're looking for this season. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm trying to make more content like this in the future, so if you have any ideas on improvements I can make or changes I can make in the future, maybe some more content you'd like to see from me, please let me know in the comments below.